بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. Alhamdulillah, as we're continuing our lesson on the prayer times, we look at the issue just before we reach recommended prayers in part 2 of our lesson on the times of prayer. There's one remaining issue, which is regarding combining prayers. And he says, rahimahullah ta'ala, وَلَا يُجْمَعُ بَيْنَ فَرْضَيْنِ فِي وَقْتٍ بِعُذْرٍ. One does not combine between two obligatory prayers within one time with an excuse. Meaning, even with an excuse, right? So even when there is an excuse, one does not combine two obligatory prayers, meaning two current obligatory prayers, in one time. Because of what we talked about earlier on, that each prayer has a clearly demarcated time for its beginning and its end. There is a clear order between the prayers, etc. So even with an excuse, the excuses being that have come in various hadiths about the traveler combining, the sick person combining, those affected by rain combining the congregational prayer. So the Hanafis see no issue with that, right? Because the Shafi'i interpreted method, for example, is that a text that is established is taken on its outward purport, whether it's decisively established, such as a Quranic verse, or it's non-decisively established, such as most hadith. This is A is established, B is established. So you join between A and B, that you pray each prayer in its time, except with the exceptions established in the Sunnah. So the Sunnah, according to the Shafi'is, conditions the Quran. The Hanafi said no. There are decisive texts and there are non-decisive texts. You understand the non-decisive texts in light of the decisive texts. So what is decisively established, that every prayer, the principles we took in the beginning, I won't reiterate all of them, every prayer has a إِنَّ الصَّلَاةَ كَانَتْ عَلَى الْمُؤْمِنِينَ, right? And this is like a shart, right? It is upon the believers, kitaban, ordained, delineated, written, literally, mawquta, in clearly demarcated times. So there are many layers of emphasis in that. Okay, that's clearly established. And that prayers have their times, they have a beginning and end, etc. That's the asl. You understand the non-decisive texts in the light of the decisive text, which is what Sayyidina Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiallahu ta'ala who said, that wallahi ma jama'a Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam salatan qat innama qaddama salatan wa akhara salah, or kama qal, right? The Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wasallam never prayed two prayers within one time. He but delayed one prayer and hastened the other. So the Hanafis are not denying the hadiths about the traveler. What does the traveler do? If you're in the rush of travel, it's difficult to stop many times. So wait till late in Dhuhr time. There's no dislike time for Dhuhr. So you pray Dhuhr towards the end of the time. Okay, so you finish Dhuhr and then you pray Asr at the beginning of the time and then you move on. So it looks like that's called al-jama' as-suwari. It is a combining in form, not in reality, because each prayer was done in its time. The sick person may be difficult to make multiple wudus. So you say, okay, normally you don't delay Maghrib deep into its time. But since you're sick, it's hard for you to make multiple wudus. Wait till make wudu late in Maghrib time, such that you can pray Maghrib safe within the time, then pray Isha right away, then go to sleep. For example, pray Isha, Witr, etc. So it looks like you're combining, but you're not really. Likewise, in the other scenarios mentioned, like someone at work, there's some hadiths, and the Hanbalis took them about combining at work. Same thing. Someone's working in a shift, etc. They can do the same thing. So it's not a case of the Hanafis ignoring the hadith. They're understanding, they're both looking at the same evidence. How do you join between the two pieces of evidence? The Hanafis consider the Quran to be interpretive of the Sunnah, so to speak. So it's a common refrain that the Sunnah explains the Quran. The Hanafis would smile, we'll let them say that. It sounds good, but Hanafis would actually say, the Quran or the decisive texts are the foundation. Everything is understood in light of them. Okay. So, وَلَا يُجْمَعُ بَيْنَ صَلَاتَيْنِ فِي وَقْتٍ بِعُذْرٍ. The only exception, he says, إِلَّا فِي عَرَفَةٍ لِلْحَاجِ, except at Arafah for the one in Hajj, بشرط الإمام الأعظم والإحرام فيجمع بين الظهر والعصر جمع تقديم ويجمع بين المغرب والعشاء بمزدلفة. Right? So one joins between Dhuhr and Asr in the first time, right? Meaning in the time of Dhuhr, right? At Arafah, and one joins between Maghrib and Isha in Isha time at Muzdalifah. Why? Because these are two instances of joining that are mass transmitted from the Prophet ﷺ. So mass transmitted texts are decisive in their indication, and therefore they can condition. But the exception remains exceptional. It's only established clearly in those two places. So you can make analogy to other things. Right? Okay. And so that's why we affirm that there is no combining, even for a traveler. But the ulama tell us, right, the relied upon position in the Hanafi, of the Hanafi scholars, that it is valid to follow another madhab on two conditions: that you do so soundly and you don't systematically seek out dispensations. Right? You do so soundly because your duty is to obey the command of Allah and His Messenger, number one. The means of obeying the command of Allah and His Messenger is فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Ask the people of knowledge if you know not. The people, Ahl al-Dhikr, are the mujtahid imams. So you must do any action that you do in a manner that at least one of the recognized, accepted, preserved schools of Islamic law, which are four, that this action is valid according to one of the four schools. Because that is the commanded means of fulfilling the divine command. There is no intrinsic obligation to adhere to only one school. There's a practical duty. You learn one school, you practice it. Because the point isn't legality. The point is you act according to the limits of Allah, and then you strive to bring excellence, virtue, sincerity, presence of heart, etc. That's the real struggle, right? So as long as you do so soundly, number one, and secondly, you don't systematically seek out dispensations, which are called tatabbu' al-rukhas. And systematically seeking out dispensations is harmful for one of two reasons. Either because it is from following one's whim, which has been prohibited in the Quran, or because it will weaken your basic religious restraint. And because when you have a choice between permitted matters, if you can't restrain yourself, then when you come to a choice between halal and haram, you have no restraint, you're going to fall into the haram. So one is that it's inherently prohibited, it's intrinsically prohibited because it's following one's whims, or the stronger argument is it's extrinsically prohibited, which is because it inevitably leads to laxity and falling into the haram. But if someone wishes to take a dispensation, they follow the valid school. Right? And that's the position. So here, Imam al-Haskafi in Ad-Durr al-Mukhtar says, وَلَا بَأْسَ بِالتَّقْلِيدِ عِنْدَ الضَّرُورَةِ. There's nothing wrong with following another madhab when there is strong need. Ibn Abdin explains there that what he means by darura is when there's a need. He says, however, we have explained earlier in the foreword to Hashid ibn Abdin that following another madhab is permissible, even without need. Even without need. As long as one does so soundly and one does not systematically seek out dispensations. Right? So let's say that there is Sidi Hamza's friend Alif. Alif is Hanafi, but he attends a masjid where there's a Maliki scholar and he helps with the recordings. He's learned quite a bit of Maliki fiqh. So he decides, I'm going to pray Salat al-Duha according to the Maliki school. But he leads Dhuhr, Asr and Maghrib at the masjid. He leads as a Hanafi. It's actually in his contract. But anything wrong with that? No. They're all valid to follow. Your duty is to follow qualified scholarship. You fulfill your duty. Right? And we have answers, inshallah, Sidi Abdul Latif will share on following madhabs. But practically, generally, so this is a legal duty. The general recommendation, what taqwa entails, is one learns one madhab, one practices it. And then one takes care of following the sunnah, cultivating one's character, virtue, excellence, etc. Right? Because that's where the real test and challenge of life is, in all spheres of life. Because our duty is not just to pray, but one's halal, all the spheres of human activity. So that's an important point. So if a Hanafi decides to combine prayers when they're traveling, as long as they do so validly, it's valid. But you need to be careful. Why? Because, for example, in the case of travelers, right? This is why these conditions are important, right? That it is very possible to get things wrong. How? Let's say I want to combine prayers as a traveler. So you have friends, so you went to Istanbul. You have friends who are visiting for the weekend from Cairo. They're combining, they're Shafi'is. Now you're a traveler according to the Hanafi madhab, but you're there for 13 days. You're visiting your son. Should apply to a couple of us, right? So you're a traveler, right? Now, could you take the Shafi'i dispensation of combining? No. Because though the Shafi'is combine, you're only a traveler in the Shafi'i school for 3 days, except for the day of arrival and the day of departure. You're a traveler for a shorter period of time. So if you take both things, you take the Hanafi position that you're a traveler for 15 days, and the Shafi'i position of combining, you're doing something that the Hanafis don't deem valid, nor do the Shafi'is deem valid. Beyond the 3 days, according to the Shafi'i. That's why, for the student of knowledge, you need to be careful. You need to be careful. The common person doesn't know anything. Like someone who's not studied anything, they're on the barakah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? That's a different situation. So the unlearned person, you don't correct on the nuances of the religion to begin with. Right? Right? That's why they say, Al-Ammi la madhhab lahu. The unlearned person has no madhab. Even if they say, I'm Hanafi. You know, if we took what it means for them to be Hanafi, I could say, I'm the king of England. But it doesn't really have any reality to it. A Hanafi is someone who studied the Hanafi school and who applies what they have studied. Right? That's the basic Hanafi. A true Hanafi is someone who understands the Hanafi school, etc. So don't go around correcting people. Oh, you can't combine because you're Hanafi. You don't know, right? That's a separate matter, right? The unlearned person doesn't have a method, but someone who studies, right, they should find out before they follow another school. How do I do this soundly according to that school? But we don't correct or condemn anything that in its particulars falls within the 4 schools. Right? Someone's combining, you don't know. Maybe tomorrow they're going to Konya. Right? There are many, you don't know. So don't pry. Besides the evident matter, someone's praying without their trousers on. You may want to, if they're staying with you, may tap them on the shoulder and say, you forgot to put on your pants after you went to the washroom, right? Obviously, because is there any difference of opinion about praying in your underwear? No, right? The poor guy forgot his underwear in the toilet. You tell them, etc. So, some sisters staying together. So one of them went for wudu but forgot to put on her hijab, and she's praying. So there's no ikhtilaf about certain things, right? But nuances. And when you don't know, err on the side of concern but caution. What is caution? It's not to correct. Caution is not to correct. If it seems something of significance, ask them to ask a scholar. You fulfilled your duty. But this is very important. Why? Because practically a lot of times we spread confusion by correcting things that do not require correcting. Okay, so this is the issue of combining prayers, right? So don't correct those who do combine because it's a matter of difference of opinion. And are there hadiths on combining prayers? Yes. We understand them as some of the Sahaba, many of the leading Sahaba did, as being combining in form. Okay. Right? 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 And the statement of Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, right, is related both in Bukhari and Muslim. It's not just the Hanafis found something somewhere, right? And you can find it in Hashiyat al-Tahtawi, right? Which says, وَحُمِلَ الْمَرْوِيُّ فِي الْجَمْعِ إِلَى آخِرِهِ. If you have Hashiyat al-Tahtawi, you can find the quote there. And وَالَّذِي لَا إِلَهَ غَيْرُهُ مَا صَلَّى رَسُولُ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهِ عَلَيْهِ وسلم صَلَاةً قَطْ إِلَّا لِوَقْتِهَا. By the one besides whom there is no God. So he swore by Allah that the Messenger of Allah صلى الله عليه وسلم never prayed any prayer except in its time. إِلَّا صَلَاتَيْن. Except for 2 prayers. Right? The ones that we mentioned. Right? It's in Bukhari and Muslim. Okay? Okay. Then we have the recommended times of prayer. Right? the recommended times of prayer. Here, there are a couple of governing principles to keep in mind, which are that, and these highlight that sometimes difference of opinions arise for good reasons. The Prophet ﷺ was asked, what actions are best? Right. So in one of the narrations, it says, as-salatu li waqtiha, prayer for its time. Okay. Or as-salatu ala waqtiha, prayer at its time. There's another narration that says, as-salatu awwala waqtiha, prayer at the first of its time. So what is the asl in the bab? What is the basis? How do you join between the various narrations of the hadith? The Prophet ﷺ said the same thing at various times. How do we join between them? But what is the main thing? Right? So there are the narrations of this hadith, and then there's another principle. That in general, if you're going to do anything good, should you wait or do it right away? You do it right away. Right? فَاسْتَبِقُوا الْخَيْرَاتِ, so vie with one another to rush to what's good. Right? So, given that consideration, and other consideration, Shafi'i said, prayer is of the good. So in general, you pray at the beginning of the time. That is the asl in general in our religion. And it's the asl with respect to the prayer. Prayers of the good, where you pray it first, and it's even come in hadith. Best of actions is prayer at the first of its time. Imam Abu Hanifa looked at it differently, particularly for congregational prayer. Why? What is congregational prayer? Salatul Jama'ah is prayer in which people congregate. Why is there greater reward in it? Because people have congregated. When something is being done in group, everything that facilitates people coming together is better. Right? Because if we facilitate, like if you're going to class and someone is going to be walking for 20 minutes in the sun, you pick them up. So, they get reward for walking 20 minutes in the sun. No. You get rewarded for facilitating someone else's good. Right? So the basis of the prayer, of congregational prayer, is gathering. So therefore, everything that facilitates gathering is good. Allah has given us the whole prayer time. That's conceptually. But then, specifically, the Hanafis would argue that if you were to say that the best prayer time is the first of the time, it doesn't work. Why? Because as we will see, okay, let's take that as a given. Okay? That you're saying that it's best to pray at the beginning of the time. Fajr time. Praying at the beginning of the time is related from the Prophet ﷺ, praying when it was dark. And it's also related from the Prophet ﷺ at the later in the time. But which of the two did the Prophet ﷺ encourage verbally? And the verbal encouragement is to pray late in the time. Asfiru bil fajr, the hadith in the Sunan like Tirmidhi and elsewhere. Asfiru bil fajr فإنه أعظم للأجر. Pray fajr when it's bright, for it is greater in reward. Okay, That's Fajr. Secondly, why is it greater in reward? Because let's say Fajr comes in right now, let's say 3:30. It goes out at 5:40, let's say. Let's say roughly. It doesn't have to be exact. I don't know exactly when it. Now, if you prayed at 3:45 or you prayed at 5:15, which of the two would more people be able to make it to the congregation? The second. Are both permitted times of prayer? Yes. But, so in terms of meaning, but also the Prophet said it's greater in reward. Greater in reward than what? Than praying early. Dhuhr, the Prophet said, Abridu bi-dhuhr. Pray dhuhr when it is cool. فَإِنَّ شِدَّةَ الْحَرِّ, because intense heat is from the breaths of hell. Min fayhi jahannam. And the meaning in it is what? When it's intensely hot, is it easy for people to get to the masjid walking? No. So you understand that meaning from it. That's dhuhr. Asr, similarly. The exception is Maghrib, as we'll see. Maghrib, the Prophet emphasized praying it without delay. Isha, in winter, the Prophet used to delay Isha so that people would be able to finish their rest and their dinner, etc., and be able to make it to congregation. So where does this general principle apply? It doesn't apply to Fajr generally, doesn't apply to Dhuhr in the summer, doesn't apply to Asr. Yeah, okay. Applies to Maghrib because of the prophetic intent. It doesn't apply to Isha in summer months. In winter months, when Isha is very early. That's where differences arise. Both parties are looking at the same text, but what are your governing principles? This is, of course, very simplified. So let's see what the author tells us, rahimahullah ta'ala. He says, وَيُسْتَحَبُّ الْإِسْفَارُ بِالْفَجْرِ لِلرِّجَالِ وَالْإِبْرَادُ بِالظُّهْرِ فِي الصَّيْفِ وَتَعْجِيلُهُ فِي الشِّتَاءِ إِلَّا فِي يَوْمِ غَيْمٍ فَيُؤَخَّرُ فِيهِ وتأخير العصر ما لم تتغير الشمس وتعجيله في يوم الغيم. So he says that it is recommended to pray Fajr when it's bright for men. Why? Because the basis for men is that they pray in congregation. And if you pray Fajr when later in the time, more people can gather. Right? And if you're praying on your own, then it's better to pray like the congregation. That's why it's recommended for men to give the adhan, the iqama, etc., when they're praying on their own as well. Right? For men. Right? For men, why? Because the consideration of congregation does not apply to women. Unless there are family members that they are facilitating congregation for. Right? In which case, they'd be rewarded for that extrinsic consideration. And to pray dhuhr, right? To pray dhuhr when it is cool in the summer. Right? To pray dhuhr when it is cool in summer months. Right? Because of the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ regarding that, number one. And number two, because of it facilitating the congregation, right? And to hasten dhuhr in winter months, right? Particularly in places where the time between dhuhr and asr is brief, unless it's a cloudy day in which one would delay it, and the concern there would be that on a cloudy day, you would not be able to tell if dhuhr time is in, which would apply in those circumstances. You're traveling, let's say you're hiking, right? And it's very cloudy and you're not sure if dhuhr is in, so you wait a little. right? But that would, and of course your cell phone died. It happens even within the city, let alone outside the city, right? And likewise, delaying Asr as long as the sun has not changed, right? The sun hasn't changed, meaning the rays of the sun haven't changed, such that the eye is not dazzled when looking at it. And this worries some people. Even our media coordinator here gets shocked sometimes. How come we Hanafis are praying Asr this late? Because their time enters early, and basically within the Shafi'i school, you lose the virtuous time if you don't pray in the first half hour. Or even less, according to some. In our madhab, it's recommended to delay it. But even the name Asr comes from squeezing something out. Right? It's the remains of the day. It's a latter part, it's a final part of the day. Except the final part of the day, which is now when the sun's close to setting, when the intensity of the sun gets less. If you were to look at it, it wouldn't dazzle your eyes. In which case, it's prohibitively disliked. So you're rewarded for delaying Asr, right? This is, of course, in general, when you have a choice. If there is a congregation, so let's say you live next to the masjid. What do? The recommended time for you is to pray in the main congregation at the masjid. And there it would be blameworthy for it to say, well, I'm Hanafi. So what I'm going to do, we're 3 co-workers who are Hanafi, we're going to go to the masjid and establish our own congregation in the recommended Hanafi time. That would be blameworthy. Because going against the congregation of the Muslims is not good. Right? Because these are not decisive matters. These are broad considerations. Similarly, even if it's a quote-unquote Hanafi mosque, they set that we pray at this time. I was asked in Turkey once that should we pray in congregation for Asr? I wanted to say, well, as Muslims, we try to follow the Prophet ﷺ's instruction to pray in congregation. Who do you follow? But I didn't say anything like that. Why? They said because they pray too early. That's not up for you. Who decides when the adhan is given? The authorities, right? In a Muslim land. As long as it's within the parameters of broader of accepted Islamic scholarship. They're not doing it half an hour before any recognized time comes in. We follow the adhan. And that's Asr time for you. Right? Regardless of what Imam Abu Hanifa said. When do they establish the congregation? That's up to either the authorities in general, or in a non-Muslim land, for example, it goes to the administration of the masjid. And as long as it's within the parameters of mainstream Islamic scholarship, there is no leeway there to condemn or to criticize. Right? You could suggest something as nasiha that, it's causing division in the community. Whatever you give nasiha, it's up for them to decide. Because that's what leadership is about. You give advice, they decide. Right? So that is, right? So you delay Asr, but you hasten it on a cloudy day. Right? Hasten it once you're sure it's in, lest it fall into the prohibitively disliked or impermissible time, right? With respect to Asr, right? That if you're, now in our times generally, we have access to things, but it's good to be aware of these things because it can happen. You're driving or you're hiking and you have no cell phone reception or your cell phone died. Now, as a believer, you should be able to figure out which way is the Qibla, at least by approximation. You should be able to figure out the time. Even broadly, that okay, now I'm the shadows seem quite long, I'm pretty sure Asr time is in. I can't tell if it's going to, how late is it in Asr time. So on a cloudy day, it's better to pray, right? And sometimes it's good to practice those things, right? That you're hiking, just say, okay, is Asr time in? And just look at your shadow. Say, I think, yeah, it is. Look clearly, it's like more than twice my length, time is in. And then you can check, you have the phone, because you could be in a situation where you don't have access to it. Right? And I'm not going to mention the country, but I was at an airport where I asked 3 people. Nobody refused, like, excuse me, what time is it? And normally people are very helpful about that. It was a bit of a strange thing. And my phone was dead. I don't want to take out my laptop, whatever. You just look outside and you make an educated guess. That was pretty sure time was in, because this gentleman joined me in congregation. We may both have been wrong, but I was kind of happy that presumably he knows what was going on. So that's Asr. Then he tells us about Maghrib and Isha, and just let it be noted, I don't write Maghrib with an E, but وَتَعْجِيلُ الْمَغْرِبِ إِلَّا فِي يَوْمِ الْغَيْمِ. It's recommended to hasten Maghrib except on a cloudy day. Again, the cloudy day meaning where you're not entirely sure, you're not able to be entirely sure that the time is in fact in. It can also apply in other situations. When you're on a plane, right? And it looks like you can't see the horizon because, you know, there's turbulence on the flight, the sun setting on the other side, but you can't go and check. They're saying you have to keep the blinds down, whatever. So you have to guess. You look from the blinds on your side, looks dark, but you're not sure. So what do? When you're not sure, you have a good hour for Maghrib, 15 minutes. So you wait 10, 15 minutes, you're now confident the time is in. But generally, Maghrib is not to be delayed. Time is in, you pray. Right? Even the congregation. So he said, إِلَّا فِي يَوْمِ غَيْمٍ فَيُؤَخَّرْ فِيهِ, except on a cloudy day where you delay it, such that now you'd be sure. وَتَأْخِيرُ الْعِشَاءِ إِلَى ثُلُثِ اللَّيْلِ, and to delay Isha up to 1/3 of the night. This is particularly in winter months. Right? Because how early does Isha come in here in Toronto in winter? Yeah, let's say 6:15. And in some more northerly latitudes may even come, let's say 6 o'clock. Right? Now, are most people home, settled? You get home, freshen up, have dinner by 6 o'clock? Well, at least brown folk generally don't. If you have dinner you've already finished dinner by 6, you've become more Canadian than they see, right? Right? So it gives people time to get their worldly affairs taken care of. But even with Isha, they say وَتَعْجِيلُهُ أي تَعْجِيلُ الْعِشَاءِ فِي الْغَيْمِ, and to hasten Isha when it is cloudy. Why? Because on a cloudy day, it would be difficult to congregate when people are walking to the masjid. And this is talking about an intensely cloudy day. Because it's night and cloudy, it would cause people difficulty. Classically, this will not be a consideration now, generally, right? If most people drive to the masjid, etc., you set times for the prayers and you stick to them. So it gives people clarity. So these are contingent considerations. And then he tells us about witr. وَيُسْتَحَبُّ تَأْخِيرُ الْوِتْرِ إِلَى آخِرِ اللَّيْلِ لِمَنْ يَثِقُ بِالْإِنْتِبَاهِ. It is recommended to delay witr prayer till the end of the night for one who is sure about waking up. Right? So the time of witr, what's the time of witr again? Oh no. Sorry? Yeah. So I think, Sidi Abdul Latif, I'll be your interpreter. You said that the time of witr is, what's the time of witr again, Sidi? Bismillah. Yes, I can. Good. Jazakallah khair, Sidi. Witr time is Isha time, except that the order between witr and Isha is obligatory. And this has a practical benefit, which is that, let's say that someone prayed Isha without wudu. And they don't have misgivings, they just don't, right? They went to the toilet and they say, you know what, let me have a snack and then I'll make wudu. So on the way to having a snack, they prayed Isha. And they realized, and then they made wudu and prayed witr. So they prayed Isha without wudu and prayed witr with wudu. In this case, witr prayer is valid. Witr prayer is valid because the time of witr is not after Isha. The time of witr is Isha time, except that normally the order is necessary. But the order is lifted with excuses. And this would be one of them. Conceivable. It's rare, but it's a real issue. It happens. People make blunders all the time. So it's recommended to delay witr to the end of the night if you're sure of waking up. So sure of waking up, meaning sure of waking up for tahajjud, for night vigil prayer. Sure of waking up means that on a weekly basis, you always wake up, right? That it is only rare that you don't get up for witr. If that is the case, then it would be recommended to pray witr at the end of the night. In any other case, one should pray witr before going to sleep, because witr is required, it's wajib, and going to sleep unsure of actually being able to get up for tahajjud is endangering a religious duty, which is witr. So one would pray witr before going to sleep. There's a misconception that witr has to be your last prayer. No. Even at the end of the night. There's 5 minutes left for Fajr, or 10 minutes left for Fajr, you prayed witr. Then Uncle Jamil called and says, Beta, tonight I have been thinking long and hard, and I think that my daughter should propose to you, because it is evident to me that you will not propose to my daughter. So after he deciphered what exactly Uncle Jamil was saying, says, yes, Uncle Jamil. Says, will you marry my daughter? Says, can I pray istikhara? So he mumbles, useless fool. But he says, okay. So you've prayed witr already. Can you do istikhara before Fajr? Yes. You can, or there's no reason. And whether there's a reason or not, you can pray after witr. It just normally, you make it your last prayer. But even before sleep, you prayed witr, then you say, you know what? You had some friends coming over to have faluda. You made the faluda, they didn't show up. So, okay, instead of having faluda with my friend, they didn't show up anyways. Let me pray a few rak'ahs. There's nothing disliked about it. Okay. So there's no dislikedness for praying after witr. Whether there's a reason for the prayer, specific reason or not. So tahajjud still remains a sunnah even if you do witr before going to sleep. After doing witr, if you wish to pray, prayer remains praiseworthy. before sleep or after sleep. So that is witr. But it should become a habit, right? There's people who are serious about the deen, right? Who, there's one sister, she's an academic. After she had her second child, she sent me a voice note, made me feel like such a hypocrite. Said, Shaykh Faraz, is there any point in praying tahajjud if you can only do about half an hour each night? So I just asked why. I said, because I feel like such a hypocrite. Because I used to do 45 minutes to an hour, but now I find I'm not able to do that, and she's feeling so overwhelmed and so distraught that she's not able to do that, right? So, one should strive to make it a default in one's life, right? Witr, right? And when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes the believers who separate their sides, تَتَجَافَى جُنُوبُهُمْ عَنِ الْمَضَاجِعِ, right? Their sides separate themselves from their resting places, because it's a struggle, right? What does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? فَلَا تَعْلَمُ نَفْسٌ. No soul can know, no soul knows what has been hidden for them. مِنْ قُرَّةِ أَعْيُنٍ, of the joys of eyes. Right? And it's not even of the joy of the eye. قُرَّةُ عَيْن, the joy of eyes, because not only the things that will please you, there's pleasures, right, of the joys of eyes. It's in the plural. Right? It's not just something that would amaze you, it would amaze all people. For what? Jaza'an, as a recompense. Jaza is a recompensing reward. بِمَا كَانُوا يَعْمَلُونَ, as a recompense and reward for what they used to do. What did they used to do? They used to get up for night vigil. Right? So that's one of the things to keep in mind, to strive to try to make a default in one's life. And one of the last times I got in serious trouble with anyone besides my mother was with one of the scholars who's staying at our house. And he asked what time Fajr was, told him. And I was sleeping in the living room with the boys. We gave him the master bedroom. Was awake, she was praying in the kitchen. So he came down right as the adhan of Fajr was going. I'd actually been on my cell phone. I put it in, I closed my eyes. I just want to see, Assalamu alaikum. The adhan of Fajr is going. And the people are asleep. Ajib. Says, Sidi Faraz, get up. I said, Assalamu alaikum, Sidi, yes. People are sleeping here? He was like so shocked. Right? I said, God bless our representative for the people of piety, and that's the attitude. What I've seen of scholars, even when they travel, they'll get up. When I was in Damascus, one of the scholars arrived nearly 2:15 in the morning. He says, what time is Fajr? I said, about 4:15. Says, can you wake me up at 3:15? There goes my sleep. So I just stayed up till 3:15, and then says we'll go to the masjid before the adhan. So had to stay up till then, and then afterwards, of course, we're supposed to head out somewhere at 9 in the morning. So I said, okay, I have to be up at 8:30. So I went to sleep on the ground in the corridor. So he woke me up, says, Sayyid, it appears that we need to go now. I was like, sprawled in the corridor just to try to like sleep uncomfortably so I could get up. But that's the thing. There's certain things that one should strive never to omit. And the merits of that are in their due places. The last thing that we're going to look at is the disliked times of the prayer. Right? فصل في الأوقات المكروهة. Right? The disliked times. And these times are disliked. There's nothing intrinsically disliked about these times. These are times that it's disliked to pray because the Prophet ﷺ told us not to pray in these times. And one of the considerations in it is that so there's an aspect of slavehood to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in it, right? That being a servant of Allah is to do what Allah commands as He has commanded. We're called upon to pray, but in particular ways. So we do it that way. Right? Ruku' is good to do, but you only do one ruku' per cycle. Said, you went into ruku', you come out, said, I was enjoying myself in ruku'. You can't just go back down. Right? You gotta go into prostration. Why? Because that's what being a servant is. Right? So likewise with our other acts. That's one aspect. But the other aspect is these are the core dislike times are 3 times of the day that there's a major change taking place. One is when the sun is rising. The other is when the sun is setting. And the third is when the sun is right at the midday. Right? When the sun is at the zenith. Right when Dhuhr time comes in. And these are times of reflection. We have been called upon to remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, particularly when the sun is rising and when the sun is setting. And these are also opportune times to remember Allah, to reflect on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's creation. There's a merit in it, which is why, although it's not a specific sunnah, many of the early Muslims used to encourage walking during that time, or to look towards the horizon, to reflect on the rising sun, to reflect on the setting sun, right? But even if you're actually out and about, it's an amazing thing that the shadows disappear and then they appear again. And this has all kinds of signs in it. One of the great poets said, كان لي ذل رسوم فاستوت شمسي فزال. Right? I used to have the receding shadow of my human frailty, but then my sun reached its fullness, so it disappeared. عشت في المحبوب حقا بعدما كنت خيال. I lived with my beloved truly after I was mere delusion. And that all this, all the shadows of our mere fleeting humanness, at the end of it, it's just imaginary thing. People are like, wow, nothing affirmed my identity as a Muslim like this new show that came out. Like, okay, let's say you died tomorrow. How did that help you in your standing before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? How to help you in your marriage? How to help you in your work? How to help you as a human being? Right? So it's all, much of what we think about mere imagination. Right? That was amazing. Okay, you enjoyed the Turkish food. All you can think about is the Turkish food I had. Right? So these are points, even the receding of the shadow and then its growth, right, is a point of reflection. So this is of the reasons they mention about these disliked times. These are times that we should reflect within, which is why we have been called upon to remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And there's of course a neglected sunnah. It's a recommended sunnah. It's not a specific sunnah, but nor an emphasized sunnah, that right at the time of Dhuhr entering to pray 2 rak'ahs. It's an established recommended sunnah. Right? Salatu Zawal, 2 rak'ahs, just as Salatul Duha is recommended, right? Which is once the sun has clearly risen to pray. Some distinguish between the prayer after sunrise, Ishraq, and they would also pray Duha, which they consider Duha being the midday prayer. Most of the jurists say there's only one sunnah during the day, and they said that the sunrise prayer, Salatul Ishraq, is Salatul Duha, according to the jurists. But a lot of the righteous said, you can pray as much as you want. If you pray twice during the day, it's better than praying once. It's a matter of different. And the door of nafil is vast. So this is a little bit about the disliked, just a forward to the disliked times of prayer. And the author tells us that ثلاثة أوقات لا تصح فيها شيء من الفرائض والواجبات التي لزمت في الذمة قبل دخولها. There are 3 times when no prayers that were due upon one before these times entered are valid. And these are during sunrise until the sun has clearly risen, and right when the sun as it is at its zenith, وعند استوائها إلى أن تزول, until it goes past its zenith, وعند اصفرارها إلى أن تغرب, and when the rays of the sun weaken, so the sunlight becomes yellow, right? So when the rays of the sun weaken until the sun sets. And the sign of that is when you look at it, it wouldn't dazzle your eyes. The ulama approximate that when the sun is rising, so this is from when Fajr time exits till the sun is clearly risen, they say roughly about 15 minutes. Some say more, some say less, till it's clearly risen above the horizon. In reality, the sun being at its zenith is a moment. Is a moment. If Dhuhr time is clearly known, don't be praying when Dhuhr time just before Dhuhr time comes in. If you want to be safe, wait 4 or 5 minutes, right? So that your prayer does not overlap with the entering of Dhuhr time. And the third is, when the last part of Asr, it really depends how that time, the further north you are, the longer it's likely to last. That's why can be quite shocking. You go from somewhere like Canada, where we have pretty protracted Asr time, and you go somewhere like Istanbul, which is much further south, you get surprised at how short the time between Asr and Maghrib is. One of my friends and I, we got lost in the old city, and we couldn't find a masjid that had wudu areas open. We ended up having to make wudu with a little cup of water, which is actually a very useful fiqh exercise. You made 2 wudus in less than 200 milliliters of water. One micro wudu, which I deliberately ensured wasn't recorded, and one overly thorough wudu in 200 milliliters of water, very comfortably. And we didn't drop any water in the masjid. I didn't drop it because I took my kufi off and made wudu on top of it, and there's hardly any water to fall. And anyways, so, but depending between winter and summer, anywhere from 20 to 40 minutes, depending on where you are. So these 3 times, if you hadn't prayed Fajr, praying Fajr during sunrise in the Hanafi school is not valid. The moment when Dhuhr time enters, you could not be doing a qada prayer. Any prayer that was due upon you before it. During Asr time, any prayer that was due before that time, so you could not be doing qada, a make-up prayer, right at the end of Asr time. It would be invalid. But the Asr of that day is valid. The Asr of that day is valid because Asr time is a time for Asr. But if you wanted to make up a missed prayer, you couldn't do it right at the end of Asr time. Now this applies to someone who knows their deen, right? It's an important principle to reiterate that it's come in prophetic tradition that address people according to their level of understanding. Do you wish that Allah and His Messenger be denied? Right? Why? That if you don't address people to their level of understanding, they will deny Allah and His Messenger. Right? So the ulama state very clearly, this is, in our madhab, the prohibition against praying in these times is understood to mean that, for example, during the time of sunrise, it is invalid to pray dhuhr during that time, to fajr during that time. Someone woke up because the sun just started to rising. It's 2 minutes after sunrise. You have to wait till the sun has risen to pray. They say, however, you do not correct the unlearned person regarding this. Why? Because in some schools, they understood the prophetic prohibition against praying in these times to be of discouragement. But the prayer is valid, including the Shafi'i school. So for a person to pray their prayer during a disliked time, it's better for them than not to pray. If they knew the right ruling, what would they do? They would follow it. So say you should not correct someone for this. Because if they knew the ruling, they would follow it. If they don't, and then say, if they don't, say, oh, but they're Hanafi. Being a Hanafi or being a Shafi is not an identity, right? If they knew, right? And maybe they know, but right now they're in a moment of religious laxity. It's better for them just to do their fard. It's valid according to some schools. So that's one of the important concepts just to be very careful about. Same with Asr prayer, right? Someone's praying late in Asr time, don't ask them what you're praying. So and some people, because they don't know, they'll tell you, oh, I was doing some qada prayers. Now, do you know what all 4 schools say about qada prayer right at the end of Asr time? No. So you should just make istighfar for prying into people's private affairs. Because you've not been sent as the Prophet ﷺ told in the Quran, Lesta alayhim bimusaytir. You're not there to control them. Someone is praying, let them pray. Maybe they fell asleep. Maybe they fell asleep. You don't know what's going on, right? So maybe they're a traveler, they didn't realize what time it is. So that's important. And then he says, وَيَصِحُّ أَدَاءُ مَا وَجَبَ فِيهَا مَعَ الْكَرَاهَةِ. It is valid to pray prayers that were due in it with dislike. كَجَنَازَةٍ حَضَرَتْ وَسَجْدَةِ آيَةٍ تُلِيَتْ فِيهَا. Such as a funeral that arrived at that time. So some people were carrying the dead body to the masjid, they got lost on the way. So the janazah reached right during sunrise. It'd be valid because the janazah arrived right during sunrise. So it would be valid to pray, but the right thing to do would be to wait 10 minutes till the sun has risen. If someone recites a verse of prostration during sunrise time, the right thing to do is to wait till the sun has risen, then to prostrate, because the prostration resembles the prayer, as we'll see later on. كما يصح عصر يومه عند الغروب مع الكراهة. Just as the current Asr prayer is valid during the time of the sun setting, the end of Asr time, but it's disliked to have delayed it that much. Right? It's disliked to have delayed it that much under most circumstances. Right? And then he says, وَالْأَوْقَاتُ الثَّلَاثَةِ تُكْرَهُ فِيهَا النَّافِلَةِ كَرَاهَةَ تَحْرِيمٍ. And in these 3 times, voluntary prayers are prohibitively disliked. Right? So you want to pray duha, right? Or you want to just pray 2 rak'ahs. Right? So unbeknownst to you, Uncle Jamil called Zubair and says, Beta, I'm telling you to marry my daughter, but be a man and you ask her to marry. So Zubair matches, with Uncle Jamil's secret permission, messages Zubaydah right after sunrise. Zubaydah, I would like to marry you. She hangs up the phone on him. And she wants to pray 2 rak'ahs of Salat al-Shukr. He's worried that is she saying no? She shouldn't. She probably message him, I'll pray istikhara and get back to you. But she shouldn't pray istikhara then. Why? Because nafil, right? In those 3 disliked times, nafil prayers are also disliked. You wait till after those times. Even if the nafil has a reason, like istikhara or the prayer of shukr, to express gratitude. وَلَوْ كَانَ لَهَا سَبَبٍ, even if it has a cause, like the things we mentioned. Likewise, كَالْمَنْذُور, right? Like a vow, a prayer you vowed to do, right? If you say, if someone said, if Allah heals my mother, I'm going to pray 8 rak'ahs out of gratitude to Allah. Wait till the sun has risen to do them. وَرَكَعَتَيِ الطَّوَافِ, or the 2 rak'ahs of tawaf. After doing tawaf, it's wajib to do 2 rak'ahs, but not during the disliked times. You wait till after the disliked time. And then he tells us about some of the other times when nafil prayer is disliked, right? And we'll continue from here before looking at the rulings of the adhan. So we're going to start looking at the adhan next, but there are some of the times when it's disliked to pray, but there's a few principles that bear elucidating there. Amongst them, one of the very popular things, which is the issue of how come when there's an explicit hadith of the Prophet ﷺ regarding praying your sunnah, even if the imam is giving the khutbah, why do the Hanafis not pray? So the Prophet ﷺ told the man, stand up and pray. The Hanafis say, it's sinful to do so. So Rasulullah ﷺ, and some people frame it in this way. The Prophet ﷺ said, stand up and pray, but Abu Hanifa said, don't. So who do you follow? It's a false dichotomy, because things have a context, right? Things have a context, right? And in general, something, that's one thing if you don't know what you're doing, right? But if if this is how you learned how to pray, right? Even your parents taught you. The assumption is your parents taught you correctly, right? That don't allow yourself to be religiously intimidated, right? There's people who say things like that, and it's just religious intimidation, and it's false dichotomies, right? Our religion is a religion that is vast, and there's difference of opinion. There's a wisdom. Allah tells us in the text, in the Quran itself, in Surah Al-Imran, it is He who has revealed to you the book. In it are clear verses. They're the foundation of the book. And other verses that are not clear. So the one who revealed the book tells you there's verses in it that are not clear. And you can read the rest of it, right? So, and there's a wisdom. Why are the verses unclear? Because it opens, it's a door of mercy. That there's a variety of understandings, and it gives, and that's just part of the way Allah has created the human being, and human temperaments, and difference of opinion gives us a lot of leeway, right? So we'll look at that. But it's not a case of the Prophet ﷺ versus Abu Hanifa, because the majority of the companions understood that hadith to be exceptional. The general ruling is once the imam stands up to give the khutbah, there's no prayer and no speaking. That's the general rule. This incident is an exception. So it remains exceptional. We'll see how. Of course, if you want to know, this is not like a TV serial or something that coming up next episode, coming up next week. If you're interested, we have a number of answers. We have a number of answers that explain this. So you can see those there. But this is one of the issues where, a lot of people cause contention. But at the same time, you have to be soft-headed as well, because it's a matter of difference of opinion, right? If a Shafi'i person comes in, they want to pray their sunnah prayer, that's their right. Now, if a masjid administration chooses to say, we don't want anyone to pray during the khutbah, that's their prerogative. Because sometimes it can be disturbing. And I've had situations where someone literally comes to the front row and is praying straight to me. And one is a bit uncomfortable because someone's literally prostrating at my feet when I'm at the mimbar. That resembles shirk. Right? So I just move to the side of the mimbar and look. It just emphasize looking at the sides. It's a weird, situation, right? So those are. But as communities, we have to be sensitive that people come with different understandings. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina wa Nabina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi sallam. We have time just for a couple of questions quickly. Sister Iman. Wa alaikum assalam. That's a good question. The Hanafis are notorious for not always defining things, right? So, which drives Shafi'is crazy, right? Like I've very intelligent Shafi'is say, your books bewilder us. I said, yeah, that's why you're Shafi'i, we're Hanafi, right? Just because our books are written differently, right? So we always define things. I said, because you write for simple people. So, but in all seriousness, the idea, it's like if there's a shoulder length spear, you hold it out normally, the sun would have risen past it. That's one. There are several descriptions of what a spear length is. Right? That if you have a sphere, and they differ exactly how tall the sphere is. But the idea is it has risen clearly above the horizon. Right? You could approximate it that if you just keep your arms level with your shoulder, right? Just think about it conceptually. You want to just do a test? Just stand up for a second. You don't have to come to the camera. Just imagine a horizon. You put your hand straight, just one, right? Shoulder level, right? Straight. No, straight, like stretch it out, yeah. And just look. So when it's clearly above the horizon, that's when it's risen clearly. There are other explanations given, right? So they say 12 minutes, 15 minutes, roughly like that extent. Some people really go above and beyond, right? Some calendars give fancy times, but sometimes you ask the people who made the calendar, they say, oh beta, we just wanted to be cautious. We make things tough for people. There's of course a sunnah when we come and look at the sunnah prayers, which is that after Fajr, if one stays up in remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The hadith mentions that someone who prays Fajr and then sits in their place of prayer with their legs crossed, remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala until the sun has risen, and then they pray 2 rak'ahs, has the reward of a complete Hajj and Umrah, a complete Hajj and Umrah, a complete Hajj and Umrah. The legal explanation of the hadith is that you don't have to sit in your musalla. You don't have to keep your feet crossed, right? The point of the hadith is to remain in remembrance of Allah. So, the reason I actually checked when I was in Jordan, someone said, can I do the dishes at that time and remember Allah? I don't know. So I went to check. I thought probably not, because the hadith says this. But the hadith commentators explain that the point is to remember Allah. Now, normally it's best, especially if you're in the masjid, or even for a woman, one of the best places to be is in your musalla, right? At home. It's most conducive to focus, but not necessarily, right? That if you have worldly duties, to take care of, and that's a convenient time to take care of them, you can do so as long as you're remembering Allah till sunrise. So someone, for example, wants to go for a walk. Many of the early Muslims used to actually go for a walk at that time, right, to reflect upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as the sun was rising. Also because many of the early Muslims complained that people have taken the masajid as social places, right? So they're sitting there as the sun is rising, they're talking louder and louder, especially the old uncles, because they become friends with each other, right? So, right? So that's one of the opportunities as well, right? With respect to sunrise. There's a question as well. Could you just read it, Sidi? If Isha is late? So is it disliked to pray Isha after sleeping? There's different opinion amongst the ulama, but in the Hanafi school, the relied upon position is it is not disliked to sleep before Isha as long as you're sure that you will get up. As long as you're sure that you will get up. Number one. Number two, it's normally disliked to pray Isha right towards the end of Isha time. Normally. Like if you're not in a place where there's strange timings. Like some places Isha is extraordinarily late or Fajr is extraordinarily early. Those are exceptional circumstances, right? That if you go to like Alaska, for example, there's some really strange timings. Actually, for summer months, Isha actually it doesn't legally come in. You have to estimate it, etc. Some places Maghrib doesn't come in. So those are except. But in normal circumstances, yes, you can sleep, but it's better to pray Isha in the first half of the night rather than the second half of the night, and particularly not to delay it till the last half hour, because then you enter into a questionable time. That's in the general case, right? There can be exceptions. If someone's physically weak, etc., or they have a job where, like they're security guard, etc., and it's very difficult. Their shift starts during Maghrib time, and it's a high security job. And they're not. Most cases you're able to make exceptions. Let's say you're not, then there is leeway. So in itself, it's permissible to sleep before Isha if you're sure that you will wake up without fail. No, the prayer simply has to be valid according to that school. Normally, if you follow the sunnahs of your madhab, it takes care of the obligatory acts of the other madhabs. Simple as that, right? Normally. But you just have to make sure. The simple thing to do is to just ask a scholar, what do I have to do? Right? Of the basic things, right? So, and particularly, let's say someone travels a lot. So this something comes up, just ask once, right? So, they say, one question can give a lifetime of clarity, right? That I'm someone, I travel a lot, I have, these circumstances. What options do I have, right? Let's say I have long commutes and I struggle to pray, Dhuhr and Asr on time. So, okay, just stop once, do one, and then do the other, for example, right? Said if your gas is running out, what do? So I take an exit, fill up my gas. It's okay. Do the same thing. You don't have to fill up gas only when the tank's low. Just go fill up some gas, get a snack, whatever. Just and it's not difficult, to be honest, right? It's not difficult. And in most places in the world, it's very straightforward. Just to go to any kind of mall, go to a corner, pray. Nobody cares, right? If anything, if you pray well, you shouldn't be looking for people's praise, but your prayer is a beautiful act, right? The only times I've been told off about praying in public was when I prayed quickly. Like a couple of times at airports, some people said, and gave me a dirty look. But the number of times when people came and said, God bless you, sir. That was beautiful. And and people appreciate that. It's a beautiful act, right? And even if they don't, the likelihood of someone assassinating you because you're praying is statistically extremely low. Right? They give you dirty looks. Same person probably give you dirty looks anyways. Right? Looks don't kill. Right? So don't worry about it. Sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Sister Amina? Wa alaikum salam. Yeah. So that would apply to Asr prayer, correct? No, so the makruh time before Dhuhr, that when the sun is at its zenith, it's makruh to be praying during that time. Whether it be a fard prayer or a nafil prayer, so one should not do that. If you're aware, including on Fridays, although there's difference of opinion about Fridays, but the relied upon position in the Hanafi school, even on Fridays, if you get to the masjid just before Dhuhr time is in, if Dhuhr time is about to enter, wait till Dhuhr time enters before you pray. Asr prayer, if you started Asr prayer before the disliked time, and let's say you decide to recite some longer surahs, etc., it's not disliked to be praying your Asr prayer a little bit into the disliked time. That's not disliked. It's probably better just to finish it before the disliked time, but there's no karaha there. Bi'idhnillah. Okay, go ahead. No, is it better for somebody not to combine when they're traveling? Right? Now, in itself, as a Hanafi, you stick to your madhab, but there's a case for both, right? In itself, generally, it's better to hold oneself to a standard of practice. Why? Because it gives one a sense of discipline. But there are sometimes secondary considerations amongst them, like you're traveling with a group, and that's what the group decides to do. We're going to stop once for Dhuhr and Asr. We're going to stop another time for Maghrib and Isha. Then the consideration of not inconveniencing the group may be a consideration. And then the scholars themselves have different practices in that. Generally, many of the scholars of Syria that I've met, what they would do if they're traveling, they would pray, they'd combine Dhuhr and Asr during Dhuhr time, but then they'd pray Asr again, right, at its right time. Often they do that to facilitate the congregation for others. I used to travel a lot with Sheikh Yahya Rodis, and he'd say, so I'd always pray Dhuhr and Asr. I said, see, I'll combine prayers with you, but please do it at the first time. So Dhuhr and Asr at Dhuhr time, but then I would pray Asr in its time as well. So I'd pray in congregation, I'd just do that quietly. He said, I've noticed you're praying Asr wrong. I said, yeah, no, I'm Hanafi. Right? So, but I'd never agree to lead him. Right? One, out of respect for him, but number two, just, for this quirk. But then he outfiqed me. He said, okay, look, you lead Maghrib, I'll lead Isha. Sure. Right? And one should be soft-headed about those things. But in those situations, right? But it also differs, right? Because there's some lands where you typically find, in lands where you have, like, for example, Syria, for example, or Egypt, where you find multiple madhabs present, people are used to there being multiple madhabs, but also they have a general level of awareness. Even common people know that, the Shafi'is do such and such, because they see them all the time. Right? Says, you ask someone coming out of the masjid, says, how come they didn't do the qunut for Fajr? Says, oh, the Imam here is Hanafi. Because they know those things, so they live that. But you go to rural Punjab and say, I'm following the Shafi'i school, right? It'd be like my mother, when I used to be Shafi'i, my sister used to be Shafi'i, says, are you guys doing namaz or are you doing bhangra? You raise your hands, what is this? Yeah? Yeah, but she said, since we were young, we stopped dancing. So, so it depends on, like people would find it strange in a certain place, right? So, if you claim you're living in a remote place where there's no Shafi'is, I'm combining prayer following the Shafi'i school, how could you do that? If there's no books of that madhab, there's no, right? But the common person, these are not things that you even argue at. Anything that's within the broad parameter of difference, let them be. If you're concerned about them, encourage them to learn their deen. How they do it, you're not there to control them, right? And that's something amazing in prophetic practice, right? That people came, asked him the most shocking of questions, he just answered their question. A man came, said, my wife does not reject any seeking hands. He said, do you wish to divorce her? He said, no. He said, do you love her? He said, yes. And this is a companion. And the woman was, but she had her, says, then enjoy her company. Right? Unless someone's asking you for counseling, just answer their question. Right? And that's very important, right? But just let people be. If they're doing something clearly wrong, but there's, especially on these details, and it wears people out, right? So we need to be very careful about that. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. So we'll continue tomorrow. If we have questions, we'll take them then as well. Barakallahu ta'ala feekum.